One of the things I think that's happening, and it's really, really scary, is that while all of this activity is going on that we're all appalled by, um, the Republican Party is very systematically across the country undermining voting rights, passing laws that make it really, really hard for people to vote. And people are saying, "Oh well, wait 2 years, we'll have the midterm elections." Yeah, we might have something that looks like a midterm election, but we might not have the people have being able to express
My
their will.
history. I'm
Um,
grateful for you being here. I have your new book that I will talk to you about, and there'll be a click through for your book under this video. I want you to know your new book is called What We Leave Behind, and we are going to talk about that. But before I get to the book, would you mind giving me a couple of minutes on where you see the world of America, how we fit into the rest of the world? If you could just, I'd love your perspective for just a minute or two.
we spent a long time promoting ourselves as the avatar of democracy and of equality and you know a nation of laws, and we've lost that. We have absolutely no right to that mantle anymore, and it's so disturbing. It's disturbing for how we are seen in the world, but I think for those of us who live here, it's even more disturbing. You were just talking about people who were, doing their job, um, who were chased down by men in masks who we can't see, um, who are using the cudgel of the state to do things that no state should do. Um, and a state that considers itself to be a democracy, I mean, that's just outrageous. So, we're all living through this. We're not sure exactly what to do, how to do it, except to bear witness and talk about it and protest and do the things that we do, um, and hope that it works. Right now, we're just relying on the courts, and that's a bet that I don't think most of us want to take.
Yeah, that's increasingly a weak course uh, of change, that is to say, of return to some kind of magnetic north. We've really lost our way, and the courts have been spotty, really, in trying to get us back. And so it's hard to imagine, Sue, that we can hit the reset button. I keep hearing about the midterms and the next election. Really? I mean, this is not a crew that's anxious to give up power.
Right,
And, yeah,
right. So one of the things I think that's happening, and it's really, really scary, is that while all of this activity is going on that we're all appalled by, um, the Republican Party is very systematically across the country undermining voting rights, passing laws that make it really, really hard for people to vote. And people are saying, "Oh well, wait 2 years, we'll have the midterm elections." Yeah, we might have something that looks like a midterm election, but we might not have the people have being able to express their will. And I mean, this has been a project of the Republican Party for decades, but with the courts in their favor and the Congress in their favor and the executive, definitely in their favor, it is getting harder and harder to maintain, voting rights as we hope they should be. I mean, we're lucky in a way um, that we are a nation in which the states control voting, but Trump is trying to federalize that through the SAFE Act in Congress. So it's passed the House. I don't think it'll pass the Senate, but it tells you what they would like to do. And so it may be a fool's errand to wait for 2 years for the midterms.
Thank you. I also think that, we've seen what's happened in Los Angeles, the way the presence of federal troops has been road tested in Los Angeles to some success, and I wonder if that, as you say, that kind of mission creep of federalizing everything isn't something that we're going to be dealing with when it comes to elections.
Well, yesterday, a Democratic Socialist Muslim brown man won the Democratic primary for mayor. And you can bet on this that will increase the number of federal intrusions into whatever happens in New York City, whether it's more ICE, whether it's taking away congestion pricing. Who knows what it's going to be, but whatever it's going to be something that will attempt to, I don't know if it's going to federalize it, but we'll see more of a federal presence in a city like New York.
Sue, are you surprised by the fact that the GOP has been so completely dominated, cowed, intimidated by this man, Donald Trump?
Not really. I mean, people who get elected to Congress have a vested interest in keeping those jobs. And if you cross Donald Trump, they'll primary you, and they'll make your life miserable, and you'll do, what Adam Kinzinger said, and I don't want to do this anymore. This is stupid. And so you end up with all the, toadies and the people who are desperately wanting to hold on to jobs as opposed to having any particular interest in representing the best interests of their constituents.
The pushback on certain people you made me think of it actually when you said toadies, in his cabinet, who are such obvious suck-ups, but also incompetent. It's a marriage of fealty and utter incompetence. And I wonder, I'm thinking of RFK Jr. and how he is completely upending the way public health has been approached in this country. And, you talked about the fact that we were always put on a pedestal when it came to justice and the way that the courts favored no one in this country. At least that was the ideal that America aspired to. Similarly, we were put on a pedestal when it came to the greatest scientific minds coming here and developing great treatments for disease and exporting those treatments. All of that has changed. And I'm wondering if you can just speak to how any pushback from the public, because I do think Trump on some level is sensitive to a pushback or bad media, might be able to pick off, if you will, some of these people, the RFK Juniors of the world, the high profile incompetence in his administration.
I think Pete Hegseth obviously is incompetent, and everybody knows that. The people who work for him know that. We've read articles about how they think he's, such a lightweight. RFK Jr. is a little different, unfortunately, because unlike a cabinet member like Hegseth, RFK Jr. has a kind of groundswell of support of certain people in this country, his Maha people, and they run the gamut. They're not necessarily all MAGA people. A lot of them are, left-wing nutballs, who will never vaccinate their children, for instance. So I think he's a problem in part because Trump sees that there are people who appreciate RFK Jr. I also think that Trump and RFK Jr. have made a very, very significant mistake, which is that their apparent chief rival, China, is going to suck up all of this scientific expertise, all of these scholars. They're gonna recruit them, not necessarily for the Chinese project, but because they have, the will to do it. And then we're going to see the scientific kind of center of the world shift from the United States to China. And that can't be good for the United States.
Oh, that's so true. I mean, I think the brain drain is already beginning. We're just seeing more and more distinguished researchers, self-deporting now because they're so worried about ending up in some gulag somewhere in the world.
Yeah.
It's such a good point. And also, I think your appraisal and summary of the support that RFK Jr. has is so right on. I mean, COVID, didn't it, Sue? I mean, COVID kind of reset that. All of a sudden, these what might have been called the quackery of RFK Jr. became legitimized by
Right.
questions around the COVID vaccine.
Yep. Unfortunately, that's true. And now, we're not going to have a new COVID vaccine. We're probably not going to have a new flu vaccine, or at least it's not going to come from a consortium of American scientists working with scientists from around the world. We're going to have to rely on the scientists from around the world, which may be fine. But one of the things that happens in pharmaceutical companies is if you don't have enough people, purchasing their goods, or in this case, insurance companies deciding that it's in the best interest of their clients to have these vaccines, they're not going to sell them. I wrote a story a couple of years ago about the Lyme disease vaccine. There was a Lyme disease vaccine. It got overwhelmed by essentially the Maha crew, and even though it continued to exist, no one would buy it. No pharmacy would buy it. No doctor would prescribe it, and they couldn't sell it, and that was the end of it. This is going to change, I hope, but I'm just saying, like, it's not just a matter of the government's not going to support this research. If there's not a critical mass of people who are able to get a vaccine or want to get a vaccine, it's not going to become available, because that's how capitalism works.
That's, I think, really the cornerstone of it. My thing with big pharma is not that big pharma is bad. It's that big pharma creates expensive treatments, and a lot of the cures or a lot of these vaccines are just so very expensive. Underwritten by the federal government is a lot of that research. But,
Yeah.
As you suggest, it may, there it is. That's your piece. Yeah. Why it took so long to develop a new vaccine for Lyme disease there in the New Yorker. I had Lyme disease, and it's brutal. And they got it after, with me, 38 days. And the reason I remember that is because, as you know, when you get Lyme disease, if it's discovered in time, and that time is really clicking along, it's literally by the hour, you can eradicate it, or you may be dealing with it for the rest of your life. And it attacks your vital organs. It attacked my heart. It attacked my joints. It was scary. And as I say, it was ultimately eradicated, but it took time to diagnose it, because it doesn't always manifest as something obvious. So
Right.
just that example is a powerful one.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that you're writing on it and that you comment on it. Now I want to ask you about your book. So your book is What We Leave Behind. And give us a sense of what we leave behind and what you're writing about.
So I'm really interested in this question of nature versus nurture, what we get from our parents, and the environment that we're raised in. And so I wanted to try to explore that in a novel, as opposed to writing an article or even a book about that. I'm sure there have been a lot of books written about that. But I wanted to do it in a kind of narrative way that would allow you not to have it sort of hit you over the head with it, but just so that you can read a story and think about it. I'm pretty good at kind of distilling science, but this isn't that. This is really a story of two very different people from very, very different backgrounds who come to this question, in part, in one case because of an adoption, and the other case it's a woman who is very successful, looks very successful, and maybe because of the way she's been brought up, has never really just asked herself kind of the critical question of life, which is, does your life have meaning, and are you happy? So it kind of gets at that.
So just to understand, these are than emotional legacies that are, in a way, imprinted by parenting, by the people you grow up around?
Yeah, some of it is that, and some of the question, and one of the questions is to what extent that, you can call it an emotional legacy, but it may be more than that. It's like, we look at someone and look at their parents and say, oh, that mannerism is exactly the same as, your dad or whatever it is. It must be genetic, which is an interesting point because it might not be genetic. It might be that you grew up with this person and you've now copied their mannerisms. So some of it I mean, a lot of it's emotional, yes, but it still raises this question of, to what extent your behavior is almost predetermined by, these things we can't even see that are kind of, the mechanisms and the machinery inside our bodies.
Yeah,
Um,
it's super intriguing, and I have to say that I see, when we talk about emotional legacy or whatever, I see the outlook of people informed so immensely by the outlook they grow up around. I know that in my own case, of
yeah,
course, you always turn to your own situation because you're so familiar with it. But I think that's part of it, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think often it's how you've been brought up. Often it's in opposition to how you've been brought up,
Oh, that's
right?
fascinating. Yeah.
In the case of this one person in one of the characters in the book, it appears to be in opposition to how she was brought up, but in fact, it replicates a lot of how she was brought up, but she doesn't see it. And I think that's true for a lot of us. We think we're so different than our parents. We've tried to be so different from our parents, and then yet, especially like when then you have children and you're like, oh, now I get it. Now I get it.
Yeah, even the phraseology you use, or whatever, the way certain expressions you have, it's like, oh my, or whatever, the way certain expressions you have, it's like, oh my God, it's the very things that annoyed me,
Right,
and I
exactly.
said I would never fall into. That's who without giving anything away. So the journey that your protagonist or lead character is on. Takes them to a crisis where they have to sort of deal with this, or I always imagine that's sort of where a novel is headed.
Well, there are two characters. There are two stories that are running on parallel tracks, and eventually they collide. Um, and in one case, it is a kind of a crisis that happens. In the other case, it's something quite the opposite of a crisis. It's something wonderful that happens that throws into uh, you know the kind of mental chaos, like, oh, do I deserve this? Should this be happening to me? um, can I accept it? um, so sometimes uh, the crisis is doesn't look like a crisis because it's something really good. um, and I just want to say that, as I've written a ton about politics and technology and all of that. um, And the reason why I wrote this book was because I really needed a mental vacation from all of that. And I think we all need places to go, whether they're physical places or mental, emotional places to go, to just take a breather. And that's why I wrote the book for myself, because I always try to write something that I want to read. But I think that that's true across the board. I think we all need to take a breath and do the things that are restorative. For me, it's reading stories, reading novels. For some people, it's playing pickleball, whatever it is. Um, but I really do think that things are so dramatically awful, and if we spend all of our time sort of living in that, um, I think we won't be able to get out of it. And so I think we do need to spend some time doing things that are just kind of restorative. And as I say, for me, it's reading and writing.
Well, it's such good advice, regardless of what that restorative thing is. And what we leave behind, we'll have a link to it under this video so you can get it. I can't let you go without dragging you back to something that you just do know so well, and that is politics and technology. I wonder if you can answer two questions for me. We got a lot of comments. We've even had guests talking about the manipulation of the vote through Starlink and through Musk's presence in everything, the notion that he might have known ahead of time the outcome, and there have been, all the stuff that you've seen, there have been, comments and podcasts about that. Rogan commented on his podcast. Can you just give me your thoughts on that? And I have one follow-up, has nothing to do with the election, but if you can just give me your thoughts on that one.
Yeah. So, I spent many years trying to write things to debunk the conspiracy theories of the right wing about stolen elections, rigged elections, machines that flip votes, that sort of thing. And so there's part of me that's incredibly allergic to that kind of sensibility and those arguments that are now coming from the other side. And yet at the same time, I don't want to be a Pollyanna and say this couldn't happen. But there are reasons why I think that it's sort of a fool's game to engage in this. Part of the reason is that the way that our votes are tallied, it's very piecemeal. So you'd have to be incredibly strategic. You'd have to target, particular precincts in the swing states. You'd have, like one of the things that's been circulating is like, look at Rockland County, New York. Look what happened there. Well, okay, it's possible that something untoward happened there, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it matters a kind of like, in an existential way, but it didn't have any effect on the election.
And just to be clear, for those who may not be familiar, the Rockland thing is essentially suggests that there were no votes top of ticket for president, yet there were all these votes for Democratic senators. So the idea somehow that you could vote for a Democrat for down ticket races and yet not vote for Kamala Harris for president, you'd leave that blank is just an odd fact. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it is very possible that that's exactly what happened. It's possible that there was some, someone manipulated the machines. It's possible that there was a glitch in the machines. It's possible that people never voted for Kamala Harris.
But you're saying it's not relevant in any case to the outcome.
No, no, and I think you'd have to see a conspiracy that worked in, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, all the swing states, and I don't think we're seeing that. The other thing is, I have not heard from the people who I have used as sources in the past to talk about voter manipulation. It's, again, it's possible the Republicans took the Dominion software. They had the Dominion software, before this last election. So it's possible, but it seems highly unlikely. And those sources have not come out and said, yes, this is probably what happened. So if I'm not hearing from them, and they're, academics, so they don't have skin in the game of, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. And honestly, I think the most effective way to manipulate an election is to buy Twitter and have, and have Truth Social and take away all your guardrails on Facebook and manipulate the American people with misinformation, disinformation, all sorts of things. That's a way more effective way of rigging an election, I think, and it worked.
Well, boy, did it ever. Did it ever. I'm going to let you go. I have questions about AI, but I'm going to table them till maybe we'll corral you again for another talk. It's so great to meet you, Sue, and just your work is really deserving of all the accolades. Again, What We Leave Behind is the latest. The novel is something you can buy under this video. There'll be a link, and I congratulate you. It's not easy to write, and you are prolific. I really don't know how you do it. But again, great to meet you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark, and keep up the good work, please.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Sue
All right.
Halpern. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.